And then what happened was the day I was put into a situation where I could have never made it, any of that happen. And I sat there and I left that meeting and I said, who am I to say there is no God? And I sat there for a moment and I thought about that. And it was at that moment that that educational experience changed from the educational to the bright light experience for me. And I fully believed.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you are all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Greetings from Studio AA, deep in the heart of Texas. That was our friend Tony M. that you heard at the beginning of this here episode, and you are going to hear so much more from him in just a moment. But first things first, this here episode is made possible by Adrian, Terry, Kurt, Todd, and Anonymous. And so you ask yourself, so you ponder, so you think, what exactly did Adrian, Terry, Kurt, Todd, and Anonymous do? Well, they visited our humble little website, www.soberspeak.com. They clicked on that donation tab and they made a contribution. So thank you so much, Adrian, Terry, Kurt, Todd, and Anonymous. This here episode is coming right out to youans as usual. We are going to let all the other folks listen in, but this here episode is dedicated to you guys. All right, so I'm going to read a couple of pieces of listener. We had quite a bit of listener feedback, basically because I didn't do it last week, so it's kind of piled up, if you will. But I'm going to read a couple of pieces of listener feedback on the beginning of this episode, so it's not as long on the back end. We're going to break it up, if you will, into pieces, sections, a more sustainable. Oh gosh, I went down a path that I could not end, which happens to me quite a lot. I don't know where I was going, but anyway, we're just gonna read a couple pieces of listener feedback on the beginning of this episode as opposed to the end. First piece comes in from Joe, and Joe DM'd on the Instagram. By the way, if you are not following us on La Instagram, I would highly suggest you get on there. It's at Sober Speak, all one word. And we have so many wonderful posts that are put out by the one and only Cassandra. She does a fantastic job. And you'll want to go on there and see all those posts that she puts out. Some of them are video clips. Some of them are audio, not video. I think they call them audio clips. And there's a lot of, I think she has Wednesday wisdom and Thursday thoughts and all kinds of stuff. But do yourself a favor and peruse through at Sober Speak and follow us there. But anyway, Joe DMs on the Instagram and he says, "Hey John, I just got out of TDCJ last Friday," which is a correctional unit. And I was able to listen to your podcast while I was locked up. Great platform, he says, exclamation point. I'm currently going to meetings in Bedford. think he means the Bedford here in Texas, and staying sober via the steps and a relationship with God. Your podcast really was encouraging while dealing with the legalities of multiple DWIs. Things are moving very slowly. The first week out, I'm doing my best to take it one day at a time. Again, John, your podcast meant everything to several of us that decided to seek out AA in prison. Keep up the good work, brother. That was so cool. That was so cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Joe, writing in. And it's things like that that keep me going. It really is. Susanna writes in and she says, okay, so I'm singing this song, right? So she said, oh, Susanna, oh, won't you play for me? Because I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. Do they still make kids sing that song? And I think I sang it in grade school. I'm not real sure even where I picked it up. You know, like my wife says, you remember the weirdest things. I can't remember what she asked me to do, pick up, or something really important. But by God, if it comes to oh, Susanna, I can sing it. Anyway, she says, John M., Mike, and Mrs. M. So she's referring to Mike, the gent that monitors our P.O. box. And she says, thanks for all you do to make this podcast happen. I am a 43-year-old mom of 2 teens and 2, in parentheses, adult kids. And I got a feeling that's like saying, well, they're over 18, but what really does make an adult? There is a lady that I go to meetings with. She won't mind me sharing this. Her name is Lacey, and she says I have kids, but they're not, quote, adults. You're not really an adult, so to speak, as she puts it, until you are financially supporting yourself. But anyway, Susanna put adult in parentheses here. She says, this time around, I am 24 days sober. After 3 years of sobriety, I relapsed. That happened, and it lasted for almost a year. My first step back into recovery was stumbling onto your podcast. Now that is cool. Listening to this podcast has brought me so much insight and joy. Every time I select an episode, sometimes at random, it is exactly what I need to hear for the day. The speakers are incredible storytellers and so authentic. Ted H. made me laugh so much. I didn't know AA could be so hilarious. I get that. I really do, Susanna. She says, anyway, I love everything about this podcast. The goofiness and what you call, quote, unprofessional, unquote, moments, like not having your big book in front of you and having to look for it, are priceless. Don't change a thing. Much love from Louisiana, Susanna H. Well, much love back at you, Susanna H. And if you had said much love from Alabama, that would have been just priceless. 'Cause I come from Alabama with a banjo in my knee, but you didn't. And so, but it's still priceless. It's still great. Thank you so much for writing in. All right, everybody. This week, our special guest of the week is Mr. Tony M., and he is from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And now I'm singing that song in my head. Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the range, or plain, or something like that. But anyway, Tony M., who says, the title of this particular episode is Who Am I to Say There Is No God? Tony has been sober since 2004, and we discuss how Tony was obsessed with money and material items and how that eventually landed him in trouble. We talked about Tony's first drunk, which involved Bartles and James peach wine coolers. I remember those things. I'm kind of shaking it out right now. We talk about Tony's early years in Alcoholics Anonymous and what he describes as an unprincipled life. Proof of that I might tell you, being that the police were standing in his front yard at 5 years sober. And I'll let Tony tell that story on his own. Tony's amends to his mother, his stepfather, his brother, and his biological father. You want to hear all that and much, much more. I know you're going to enjoy Tony, and we will have plenty other listener feedback at the end of this episode. Here's Tony. Okay, everybody. So today we are sitting here with the one and only Mr. Tony M. I'm going to let you tell people where you're from, Tony. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, give your sobriety date if you wish, and then tell people where you live in this land of ours, please.
All right. Well, thank you very much. My name is Tony M., and I'm from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and my sobriety date is August 16th, 2004.
So help us do the math. How many years is that, Mr. Tony?
Well, that is 19 years and a few months, but we're not there yet to the 20 mark. But no fronts, and as they say, but I've got 19 years.
That's great. So you're coming up on 20. That's going to be fantastic. And yeah, there's something about I don't know why, but the zeros and the fives people get all excited about. Right? They're good. Just milestones, landmarkers, and that's great. Congratulations on your 19 plus years. So we met each other through Mr. Cliff G, who we've had on the pod many, many times. So how do you know Cliff? I'm assuming from up in Oklahoma City somewhere.
Yeah, so me and Cliff probably met about 14 years ago. he was a professional attorney for me in a bankruptcy, and I had come into the program and I had some financial stuff going on, like many folks do, and I reached out to him. And he gave me some advice, and I didn't listen to it. And then about a year later, I went back to him, and he helped me fix everything that I didn't listen to. And from there, he became my sponsor. And so I've been working with him in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for this whole time. And I like to say that advice he gave me was one of many times that he gave me advice, and I didn't listen to it. But I've gotten much better at listening to his advice and his recommendations at this point. So.
That's great. Yeah, I've talked to him several times about being a bankruptcy lawyer and about how he runs across folks like yourself on a consistent basis. And I know you are probably not the only one he has given that counsel to about, getting into AA or getting their life straight or whatever. But wow, I'm glad to know that somebody got traction and moved forward with some of his counsel. That's fantastic. Counsel in both the bankruptcy area and in the AA arena. So that's good.
Yeah, whenever I met him, I'd been in the program, I'd say about 4.5, 5 years maybe, and just really wasn't taking any action. I was just going to meetings, and I didn't really understand what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous was. And, and he was just really kind and caring. And so whenever I got to that point where I hadn't been drinking, but life was miserable, and I couldn't figure out why, because I was going to meetings and I was praying. I mean, heck, I'd go to 3 meetings a day. That's 6 prayers a day. That's more than I ever did before, right? And I just couldn't understand why things weren't going my way. And I sat down with him, and he introduced me to the book of Alcoholics Anonymous in a way that hadn't been presented before. And we talked about when it says pray, we pray. When it says write, we write. And, when it says help others, we help others. And, and that really, at that moment, I was just ready to hear it and was ready to be present in my recovery.
I love that 6 prayers a day. Yeah, because the Serenity Prayer and the Lord's Prayer, you do that.
Yeah,
several times. I get it. Okay, so let's back up a little bit here. Did you grow up in OKC?
So I was actually born in Puerto Rico. My biological father was in the Air Force, and then we moved to Virginia from there, and then ended up in Oklahoma City. And he was on Tinker Air Force Base. And then at a point, my mom and my biological father separated. And I like to just make the story short is that my mom married her boss and, got divorced from my dad, married her boss. And then, life changed. And I lived here, all the way through college. did a little stint in Tulsa, Oklahoma, some time in Kansas City, and then back to Tulsa. And then once I got to the point of almost pretty much being homeless, and I ended up back in Oklahoma City at mom and the guy I call my dad, their house, and was able to get help at that point.
Okay, so take me through some of those formative years. Like, what would you say were some major milestones? You talked about some of them already, but I mean, give me a thumbnail sketch of what it was like growing up in your environment. What sort of struggles you had? What sort of joys you had? I mean, what was Tony like as a youngster?
I view it as two different experiences as a kid. So I had the experience where my mom was married to my biological father, and I really viewed that as just a dark time for me. Now, whether it was or not, I viewed it as, because me and my real dad didn't get along really well, and him and my brother did, and I was, pretty much resentful for that. They had a lot in common and a lot of connections, and me and my real dad didn't. And I was into things like band and into music, and it just wasn't really cool. It wasn't a cool thing. Looking back, I can't think of anything cooler, but at the time, it's not a bright shining moment to tell people that you were in band. And then whenever my mom and him separated, like I said, she married another gentleman, and he was amazing. And whenever I say he was amazing, he loved my mom, he loved me, he took me in, he showed me a lot of stuff. But being the kid that I was very obsessed with material things. I was a kid that I put my money in the piggy bank, and I'd take it out an hour later, and I'd fantasize how I was going to make it to just vast amounts of money out of this little $5, and just to spend it at the toy store, like an hour later, and just wish I had never done that. And I was just obsessed with money and material things from an early age. And this guy gave me everything that I could ever want for. And unfortunately, I manipulated him and my mom into giving me materialistic things and getting me anything I wanted. I was the only one that went to college out of all the kids. So I wore that as no one else did this kind of badge, and I'm owed. And they came through with everything that I wanted. I did without nothing. I had 3 cars from the time I was 16 till the time I graduated college, and I didn't pay for one of them. It's just like I had my own apartment in college. I was very blessed, from that standpoint, but it was not all done without manipulation. And the relationship with them, and that's pretty much where I was at. And I like to say that, my bright moment in life was that I worked in a fast food place. I was in band, and my parents owned a sewing machine store. And it's like none of those are things that as a kid you think are like the top 3 things of coolness. But you know what? It was the life that I have. And today I look back and I'm very grateful for it.
So take me, how old were you when your parents split again?
I was in 6th grade. So what would that be? Probably like 10, 11, I think,
Okay.
something like that.
And when they split, did your brother come with your, sounds like you were living with your mom and your stepdad at that time. Did your brother, what happened with the brother? Did he go with the dad, or how'd that work?
Yeah. Yeah, so my brother ended up coming with my mom and me. He was not pleased with any of that, and my biological dad moved to Texas. He moved actually to the town where my grandparents were closest to, Gainesville, Texas. And so yeah, so he moved in. We moved into or they got a house. My mom and my new stepdad got a house, and then he had a son and he had a son and 2 daughters, and then the 2 daughters were married and already out of the house and had their own kids, but his stepson Roger actually moved into the house with us. So it was all 3 of us, or me, my brother, and Roger, and my stepbrother, and my mom and my new dad all living together. And we had like the Sunday meals and like houses always full of food. We took trips and did everything. Just my brother and my stepdad didn't get along, and that was okay, to me, because I was getting everything I wanted. I
Right.
was getting the attention.
That's
So
interesting. So you were a little bit the odd man out when they were together, but then your
yeah,
brother became kind of the odd man out when your mom and your stepdad got married. Very interesting.
yeah. Yeah, and I was the youngest, so naturally they wanted to do everything right with me because they had all these other, kids that, maybe I'm not going to say they didn't view that they did right, but I can tell that they wanted to do as right as they could with me and just take care of me, and they loved me dearly.
So drinking came in. I'm assuming drinking came into the picture at some point here, or otherwise we wouldn't be talking today. When did you start experimenting, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, so the drinking scenario came very interesting. Is that, like I mentioned, I had an older stepbrother, and he was of age to buy alcohol. My parents, like I say, we lived in Oklahoma City. My grandparents lived in Gainesville, and my parents would have to go down to Gainesville and help them take care of their land and stuff like that. So they would take trips, and me and all my friends at the fast food restaurant decided we were going to have a party, and we decided we needed alcohol, and we were going to have a cookout. And so it was, I hate to say it, but it was the first time that I felt an employer owed me stuff, and what I felt they owed me was food to cook for my cookout.
Yeah.
So I managed to take that, and I ordered the first beverages whenever I was about 17, no, 16. I was still in high school, so it'd probably be around 16 because I had a car, so it was probably around 16. And I had no idea what to order, but thank God for Rolling Stone magazine back in the day and those full color ads. And I went to my brother and I said, "Hey, we're going to have a party and we want some, alcohol." And I didn't know why we wanted alcohol, but we wanted it. And what happened was he said, "Well, what do you want?" And I was perplexed. And I said, "Let me get back to you." And I found that Rolling Stone magazine, and there they had it, was that bright color ad for Bartles and James wine coolers. And, and that's what I started. And I always say, I'd love to say that, man, I started out with something, really impressive, like, a good scotch or a brandy or something, but it was a wine cooler. And he asked me the next perplexing question. He said, "Well, how many?" And I said, "Man, we're probably going to need 4 cases." In my mind, I don't know what that means, but I ordered 4 cases. And, he asked me what flavor, and all I could think of was peach. And so I got 4 cases of peach wine coolers, which is an absorbent amount of wine coolers. And, he wheeled those in on a dolly, and I saw those. And my first thought was, I'm going to have to drink all of these. And that was before I ever took a drink. And we tried to do as much damage, and I drank as many of those peach wine coolers as I could that night. And what I know about it is simply this: is that, the alcohol went in my body, and it does exactly what the book described. Gave me that warm feeling. It entered into my stomach, and it changed the way I feel and my outlook on life. And I just was okay with everything right that minute. And I didn't matter that I was at my career at that time was a fast food restaurant. It didn't matter that I was in band. It didn't matter my parents sold sewing machines. I was able to live in that moment for the first time. And that was my first experience with alcohol. And I remember it so vividly, of where we were at. And my parents had white carpets, so we had to be extra careful with that. So it was a chore, but it was, what I visioned at that time, well worth it.
All right, so you're off to the races now with the peach Bartles and James wine coolers, and I do remember those. And and I was just thinking why you were when you were talking about that with the Rolling Stone thing, is why they run ads, right? They work.
Exactly.
It influences people. All right, so that's 16. Take me through 16 to 18, like when you went to college. Any other major milestones there?
No, not really. I mean, it's like I was pretty good at music, and so I ended up going to University of Oklahoma on a music scholarship. And so I just had to play in one of the bands each semester, and they paid for some of my college. And yeah, and at that point, my drinking wasn't continuous. I drank when I could, and and I had resources to get it, but there was no consequences with my drinking. And there was this, I was a good student, I was good at everything, and I got to OU, and things started to change a little bit there.
All right, so take me through the OU's years. What do you mean things started to change? In what ways?
I was living alone, and I started making these health and financial decisions. And what they looked a lot like were, should I buy food or should I buy alcohol? And, should I pay a bill or should I buy alcohol? And, for some reason, alcohol always, won out the decision. And I started this collection of bottles on top of my refrigerator. Now, mind you, I'm a brand new freshman in college, and I've managed to get my own apartment my first semester of college and not live in the dorms. I'm free. I've got, a little part-time job and, and I've got a little cash and I've got some scholarship money and, and I'm just collecting all these bottles and I've branched out the, stronger stuff at this point in time. I'm not putting Bartles and Jane's bottles on top of my refrigerator, but, I'm getting some, some vodkas and some, whiskeys and all this type of stuff. And I had this shrine that whenever people came over, I would just show them and be like, look at all that I drank. Like, I was like really impressed. And, and alcohol just started to become the way that I did. And, and the way that I would drink at that point in time is that, I would drink until I got sick. I would get sick. I would brush my teeth and I would drink again, and I would go to class drunk. I would go to class hungover. And what I did all those magic things during college, like thought I had the solution for everything. Oh, I took this test while I was drunk and I scored really well. That's the key is I just do my best work when I'm drunk, right? Kind of sound familiar. And at that point, I try it the next time and I fail miserably. And I'm just like, well, this class just isn't for me. I just had all these different things and I didn't have any consequences really. I had a lot of just lowering of grades over the years. Like, I started out as a really good student and then gradually, it was just, and I never got in trouble for my grades. It was just, like, hey, you sure you're doing your best? And I would make up some story about nobody understands, I'm stressed out. I'm working this 11-hour part-time job, and I've got all these classes. And yeah, so it was just, and then I managed to get a degree somehow and I drank the whole way through. And, it was quite an interesting task, but I accomplished it.
What kind of degree did you get?
So I have a fine arts degree. I originally wanted to be a music teacher, specifically a band director. But see, like I described earlier, is that I'm very materialistic at this point in my life. And money is a motivator. And I quickly realized that if I became a teacher, that where I was going to have to live was probably going to be in a smaller town, and I wasn't going to make a lot of money, and I just couldn't fathom that was going to be possible. So I just collected what I had as far as credits at one point in my college career and said, what can I get with this that'll just get me a degree and get me out of here so I can go make some money? And I ended up with a fine arts degree with an emphasis in management. And so, yeah, that's my degree.
Gotcha. It's interesting. I know where you're going just because you mentioned the bankruptcy on the front end. And I know that you've talked about the material stuff. So I know we're going to get to that bridge eventually, but it's a very interesting. You're obsessed with money and now you're ending up in bankruptcy. So, all right. So you graduate from school, you have this degree. Take me from there.
Yeah, so I went to work for a retail establishment that was opening in Oklahoma City, and I did really well. It was a electronics store, and I was living at home with my parents at that time, and I was working and I was making, at that time it was not a lot of money, but it was enough to pay the bills that I wanted to pay and not the bills that needed to be paid, but the ones I wanted to pay. And and mom and dad were still kicking in, and and I did really well there. And they had a problem store in Tulsa, and they asked me to move to Tulsa. And so I packed up my things while my parents were out of town on a cruise, and I moved to Tulsa one weekend, and I started that job as a supervisor there. And and that establishment, I worked my way up to be a manager in the store over a course of the years, and I was very successful. And it's just like my drinking didn't get in my way really. But I still had all those drinking episodes, and I still, I was chasing that money. I just needed to have that title and that money, and life was going to be good. And and I was just always drinking, and always, I would show up to work though. I would work some long hours, and so I did that for a while. And from there, I ended up moving to Kansas City with that company for a district level position, which gave me the title I wanted and that I felt I needed and I felt I deserved. And from there, I moved on up to, did that for a while. And, and really that's where I lived in Kansas City. Yeah, I was living in Kansas City then, and then they moved me back to Tulsa. And really, my drinking had really taken off whenever I was in Kansas City. And along this way, I got into a relationship, and and about, I don't know, a year and a half before this relationship ended, I decided that I wanted out of it. But what I did was the same thing that I do with everything. So I made a decision and I didn't tell anybody else. And I quit drinking because I was really drinking pretty heavy. But the job I had allowed me to travel and drinking was okay. It's like everybody drank. And so it was like, no, I was not the odd man out. So we picked hotels by where we were, where the bars were and everything. And I got this relationship and I decided I was going to be single in a year. And so I did the natural thing is I switched to exercise because, I couldn't go back out on the market with all this drinking weight on. And after a year, I was looking good and I became single. And first thing I did was I went straight to the bar. And, I'm behind a post office in downtown Kansas City, texting a friend to come get me. And I always like to say that, I was texting, and this is before Siri. So it wasn't like, hey, Siri, call Brad and have him come get me. It was like, I'm hitting the three button trying to get to the right letter. It's just
Right.
like old school flip phones. And I realized at that point that maybe I have a problem, but I didn't know what to do about it. I was like, it was starting to become inconvenient and starting to have a few consequences, and work was really starting to ask some tough questions like, where are you? And,
Right.
and I wasn't able to respond very timely. And I really was manipulating it. And I'll be honest, I stole from that company in many, many ways, both, from a financial standpoint of like my time. The book talks about padding expense accounts. Like,
Mhm.
I think that's in two employers. Now I say that, I love to pad the expense account. Like, it was like, and some could say that it wasn't even padding because I was just making stuff up. And it's just, but yeah, and drinking just started to take a different view than what it had previously.
Okay, so my guess is we're getting kind of closer to your entree into Alcoholics Anonymous. Where does that come into play here? Where do you hear about AA? Was the first time you heard about it from Cliff? And talk to me about all that.
Yeah. So what happened was is that I got moved back to Tulsa, and I told them I was like, well, I'm only going to stay there for 2 years because I didn't really want to be in Tulsa. And my drinking became continuously daily drinking. And I remember the first day that I woke up early to go to work, and I was committed to going to work this day. And I went in the kitchen and I started drinking before I went to work, and I'd become just a daily drinker. And what happened was is that I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, but I felt like I needed a therapist. So I found this therapist. Now, mind you, I live in Tulsa, so Oklahoma City is about 89 miles away. So I find a therapist in Oklahoma City because it's what makes sense. It's like, pass 1,000 therapists to get to one that, I don't even know. And I go and I do the thing that a lot of people do is I just wasn't honest with her. And she said, well, you need to come back next week. And so I went back the next week, and it was the first time I was honest with anybody. And I said, hey, I drink every single day. I can't stop drinking. I want to stop drinking. And in all of this, the whole financial world had collapsed around me. My house was in foreclosure. Everybody wanted their money back. My parents had stopped talking to me. I just ruined all the relationships that I had. I had finagled a way into getting time off from work through a family medical leave act. And I was, and I was going to fix myself. But what happened was 30 days into that plan, I was about to be homeless and I couldn't stop drinking and I had nobody there to turn to. And I went to this therapist and she asked me this simple question. She said, well, do you think you need to go to treatment? And I said, I do. And I believe the only reason I said that was because I was about to be homeless. And then she asked me the next question is she said, all right, well, or actually we called the treatment center and they said they could get me in 3 days. And she said, do you think you need to go to AA before you go to treatment since it's going to be a few days? And I remember I told her, I don't think I'm that bad, because I didn't know what AA was. I just was like, I committed to this thing of going to 28 days in treatment. And now she's asking me to go to some meeting that I don't even know what it means. And so I get to this treatment center and I get the best counselor ever. And she advised me of Alcoholics Anonymous and told me all about it. And she said, based on your entrance exam in this place, that the fact that it took you like almost 2 hours to do the little test whenever you got here, that I'm pretty sure you're probably alcoholic. And based on what you've described and what you've talked about, and that's, if that is true fact, then you're going to need the program of recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous. And she told me that and I'm sure she told me that it's the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but what I was ready to hear is go to meetings and get a sponsor. And so I did that 28 days, and I got out and I went to meetings, and I was back in Oklahoma City. My family was talking to me, and I got a new job because the other one I left before they fired me. I did that showed back up, and I was like, all right, they said, hey, we need to talk to you in Kansas City, and I was like, I quit. I knew what was coming, and I just, I ran. I just wasn't ready to face those consequences. And yeah, so then I started going to meetings, and I went to meetings for about 4.5, 5 years, and just was, like I said, some people call them meeting makers. I was just that guy that showed up in meetings, and and just because I didn't do anything with my sponsor, I still disrupted AA meetings by sharing on steps that I never took. And I was a disservice to Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time. And I shared about those 28 days I had in treatment. It's really what I did. And, and I gained a little bit, but, I was restless, irritable, and discontented sitting in meetings. And I was resentful and I was judgmental because I hadn't had any spiritual solution or spiritual growth in any of those 4.5, 5 years. And that's where I met Cliff at that time. Was, after a series of events, I met him seeking some advice because I'd heard he was a bankruptcy attorney. And that's where I met him, was about 4.5, 5 years into my sobriety. And
so
I was just broken and miserable.
Did you meet him in the meetings or in his offices?
So whenever I had all this financial stuff coming back, because, I had a lot of loans and a lot of credit cards, and I had this house that's short sold, which means, that somebody came in and bid it, said, hey, we'll pay this much for it. And the bank said, all right, well, let's take what we can get. And I agreed to pay this $100 a month for 75 years to get the difference paid off. And so I went to him and I was just like, hey, I can't afford this, and if I can't, all these people, and I want to buy a house because I'm selfish, and, I want to buy a house and all this stuff is on my credit, how do I get it fixed? So I was looking for a bankruptcy attorney, and I mentioned to somebody, and they're like, oh, you need to find Cliff, he's a bankruptcy attorney, and he's usually at these meetings. And so I stalked him at a meeting and went and found him there and got his card. And then, like I said, I didn't listen to him immediately. And, and about 9 months later, I called him and was just like, all right, I got to do something here, both in this, with my sobriety and with this financial stuff.
Okay. So the first 4.5, 5 years or whatever, were you doing things? I mean, obviously you're sober, right? But were you doing anything
Correct.
that was different, so to speak? Or were you, like they always say, if you sober up a horse thief, you have a sober horse thief, right? Were you changing at all? Were your financial decisions changing at all? Were your relationship changes? I mean, what was going on?
No, so I was living a very unprincipled life, I would say. It's just like the only thing I was not doing was not drinking. I was still spending money like I had it. I was still manipulating my parents for money. I used to do this thing, and I like to tell this story, is that once I got sober, me and my mom's relationship got really well, and she loved to have her hair cut and colored. And I found this guy that did a really good job, and she didn't like to drive, so I always said that I'd go get my mom and take her and get her hair cut. And so it sounds like I'm paying for it to a lot of people. And really what it was is that I was getting her, taking her, and she was paying for my haircut and her haircut. And then I would do this stuff like, make sure I'm almost out of gas so the car would ding whenever I'd get her. And she'd be like, what's that? And I'd be like, well, I didn't have time to put gas in the car. And then she'd be like, oh, well, let's stop and get gas, and here, I'll pay for it. So I was manipulating money out of them, out of my parents still. So I wasn't living principled lives. And, during this time, the reality is during this time, this whole bankruptcy, things had changed. And at this point, they were talking about the laws had changed, so I just didn't get to walk away from it. They're like, you need to pay us money every month, and we're just going to go ahead and take it out of your checks. And I was just not spiritually ready for that in any way, because I was still so entitled to that money. And, what I'll say is that, an opportunity presented itself for me to make cash through some distribution of some items, and I took that. And I decided to do that. And, the sole purpose and the reason that I told myself to do this is that I could get the bankruptcy paid off in a year, year and a half versus the 5 years if I did this. I could do this with what they're taking and I could get it paid off early. And then I could live the life that I wanted to financially. I could have the house that I wanted. I could have the car that I wanted. I could do all of this stuff because I was still stuck in the material. Well, there's no right way to do a wrong thing. And, all of this came crumbling down really quick. And I ended in, with somebody breaking in my house and stealing all this stuff and the police being there because I had an alarm. I had an alarm because my mom paid for it. And, and I stood on my front yard and I was just like telling the police that that whoever broke in my house didn't steal anything. And the police were like, "So you're telling me somebody broke in your house and they didn't steal anything?" And I said, "Correct." And that's where I was at 5 years sober. I knew about the program, but I just wasn't to that point where I was willing to surrender all parts of me. I had surrendered the drinking. I fully believe because I'd asked God to remove that obsession to drink and he done. But I still held on to those okay, God, I'm going to hold on to the financial stuff. And like I talked about earlier, is that materialistic stuff and the material was so embedded in me of that's how you describe myself. That's how I describe myself. That's how I show my value in the world. It's not by loving and caring others or doing service work. It's by what I can show you that I own. And so whenever I was without that, I had no identity, and so I was willing to do everything. And so here I am broken at 5 years sober with the police standing in my front yard asking me why somebody would break in my house and not steal anything. And I had to lie. And at that point in time, it's just like a series of events. I ended up at, the table with Cliff and we talked about him sponsoring me. And he said some things that, you're going to do what I say. You're not going to, ask why. You're just going to do it. You're going to call me. We're going to be of service to other people and we're going to do everything that the book says. And at that point I was beat down and I was willing to do it. And I said, yes. And, and from there on, it's been just an amazing journey.
Very interesting. Okay, so you're 5 years sober, and then you kind of start working the program at that point, right? Up to this point, you're just kind of a meeting maker. So take me through, I'm just curious about some of your amends as well. What was it like when you started into that journey?
Yeah, so my amends, it was a lot of my amends were financial in nature because of the harm that I had done. And, my big ones, there were some that, me and Cliff wrote off the list because they were just, ex-partners and stuff like that we were just going to leave alone. But, the big ones were to my mom and my stepdad. And so I sat down with them and they were inseparable. You could never get one without the other. I mean, they were just, they worked together, obviously lived together, were married. And so you just couldn't have one without the other. So I sat down and did those with them. And, and I remember the thing that they said was that, that they were, proud of me and that they knew that I was having struggles and that, the hardest thing was for them to cut me off. But they also said that they understood and that they loved me through all of it. And my stepdad said that the hardest part was for him was seeing that my mom had to stay up all night and worry about me and not know whenever the phone was going to ring what was happening to me. And, and I listened there to them. And, and part of the amends to me is whenever you're making it, I know what I've done, or I think I know what I've done, the harm that I've caused. And I lay that out. But then I take the time to let them tell me, is there anything else? And, and my mom said, no, of course. And my stepdad said, yes, I have stuff. And he told me about all that stuff and how mad it made him. And, and he was thankful that that I had gotten into recovery and that I was doing such great things and everything. So, that journey really took, the rest of them were, like some old bosses and some old friends paying back some money. So some simple ones. But the interesting thing that really, that I learned from my sponsor is that my mom said, just keep doing what you're doing. And for a lot of people, that sounds like the get out of jail free card, right? Like just keep doing what I'm doing. But really, at that point, whenever I made that amends, what I was doing was I was an actual member of Alcoholics Anonymous, being of service to others, being of service to my home group, being self-supporting, And I was actually stumbled into, a service position of, in corrections for the area and taking meetings to some local prisons. And, that's what I was doing. So whenever I agreed to her that I was going to keep doing what I was doing, it was not drinking. It was the whole components of all the programs of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so that was the commitment that I made to her. And to this day, I still honor that. I still do every single aspect of that. So, that's really where the greatest amends that I have. All the other ones, the financial stuff, they took them, kind of took care of themselves through the bankruptcy and by me paying everybody back. But the biggest one that I had was that one. And then what's crazy about amends is that you don't think about it until things pop up. I didn't understand that more will be revealed. But what happens is it does. If you grow spiritually, more things will become revealing to you. And I remember I was going to this meeting and this guy walked in and it was a service meeting and I was going and this guy walked in and he reminded me of what my father looked like whenever I last saw him. And, me and Cliff talked about it. And I was like, hey, maybe I didn't give this guy a fair chance. Maybe all these years I've just, kept him shut out and maybe he was doing the best that he could. So I started on this journey of looking for him. And, luckily for me, he had a very specific first name. And so I was able to look it up. And, the first time I Googled him, it didn't show anything up. 3 months later, I Googled him and, and it showed an obituary. So I was like, all right, well, he's passed away. So now I know what I'm working with. And so then, I later another day, just randomly, I looked at it and it had a headstone for him. And I was like, all right, but it still never said what cemetery he was in. And then finally one day I looked at it and it said what cemetery he was in. And I was like, I know that cemetery because that's the road you exit to go to Grandma and Grandpa's. And I called Cliff and I said, hey, I think I need to go do this amends. So I took off work the next day and I drove from Oklahoma City to Gainesville, Texas. And I went to that cemetery and I walked all the way through that cemetery until I found his headstone. And I sat there and I said my amends and I did everything, that I could to make it right at that point in time. And I was willing to, because I know the importance of amends is that whenever it comes up and it props up is that I have to take immediate action. And so what I had learned is I was willing, and I got set free from that. And I did the best that I could once I realized that it was owed. I wasn't willing to sit on it.
Very cool. What about your brother? Do you guys talk to each other very much nowadays?
Yeah. So my brother, he moved to Massachusetts probably about 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. His wife's family was from there, so they moved there. I talk to them, like every week. We text and we talk and everything, and we spend some time together. And it's interesting because, once again, in my story, I talk about, whenever I was in college, I got tired of relying on other people of buying my alcohol. So I made this decision. And once again, this is, people love the technology age, but there were some advantages to not having the technology age. And one of that was that you could take a birth certificate and a social security card to the Department of Motor Vehicles in Oklahoma City and you can get a fake ID. You can get your ID with your brother's name on it. Right. And so I know all his information, so it was real easy. So I planned a trip on the 5th of July, said I lost my wallet at the lake. I needed a new ID. They printed me one, and I was able to buy alcohol. I didn't have to rely on anybody. And, and I would tell this story about how I wanted to be so independent that I was willing to do that, to get a fake license to buy my own alcohol and to get into clubs before I was 21. And it didn't dawn on me till like last year. He was visiting and I thought, did I ever mess up his license? Did I ever cause him any problems? Because I have this license out there with my picture on it that had a different expiration date than his probably was. So he was sitting there on the couch and I just said, hey, I got to ask you a question. Did you ever have any problems with your license whenever you were 22, 23? And he's like, no, I don't think so. Not that I remember. And he's like, why? And I said, well, this is the action that I took. This is what I did. And so I just needed to make sure there was not anything that, I had caused harm for him that, you had to pay any fines or extra money that I owe you for. And he laughed and he was like, "You did that, really?" But the reality is that, I told that from the podium for how many years, and I never once thought that was wrong until the day I thought that was wrong.
Mm.
And it just happened to be a coincide whenever he was going to be present. So, I just know for me that God works in my life when I allow him in there. And whenever I'm not focused on the material, because the book tells us that, the material comes secondary, spiritual comes first, all the other comes after that. And once I got that in sync, all these amends just that I owe just kind of flow out. And as I realize them, I'm willing to make them. So yeah, me and him are good, and me and his wife are good, and their kids, he's got some stepkids with them, and yeah, we're all good, and they're happy that I'm still sober and doing good. So it's, we have a good relationship.
So I want to kind of wind it down. If you think about people listening, right, there are folks all over throughout the world, actually, listening to this, and just talk and kind of wrap it up, your experience with Alcoholics Anonymous, what it's meant to you, what you would give us some parting words.
Yeah, so this is what I'm going to say is that, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with the whole prejudice against the whole God idea. I formed this opinion whenever I was a kid, and I linked God with the whole church idea, and I didn't ask any questions because I was just a shy kid and everything. And what I learned coming to Alcoholics Anonymous is, in the back of the book, it talks about the spiritual experience, about how we have the educational variety or the white light experience. And for me, what happened was I had the educational variety of the actual spiritual experience. And what happened was I did all this work, or these actions, this acts of kindness, these amends, these being of service to other people, going places that were inconvenient, going places that were convenient, just, being honest with people, telling everybody, what was going on with me, working the steps with Cliff. And then what happened was the day I was put into a situation where I could have never made it, any of that happen. And I sat there and I left that meeting and I said, "Who am I to say there is no God?" And I sat there for a moment and I thought about that. And it was at that moment that educational experience changed from the educational to the bright light experience for me. And I fully believed. And what I learned, and the thing that I can say is that, step 2, it asks us to come to believe that there's a power greater than ourselves. And it doesn't say that we define it and we fully understand it there. And what I'm so thankful for is that my sponsor was like, "Hey, we're going to keep moving forward." And that he had me grow spiritually step by step, by being of service, by taking the actions, that I got to that point where that question was answered for me through a series of events I could never created. So what I'm going to say in just closing is that, all these actions you may think at that moment that, why am I doing this? I'm not getting anything out of this. But I can tell you this is that don't stop, because eventually you're going to have that experience. And I know this because 1, I've had it, and 2, because the book guarantees me it. So that's what I'd like to close with.
Love it. Thank you, Tony. This has been really cool. I appreciate it. By the way, I love that painting behind you. I don't know what that is.
Oh, thanks.
Is that yours? Did you make it?
No, that's a Kirkland 50% off painting. So it's just like, I'm cheap. I've gone from used to, now if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said, that's a $7,000 painting that I commissioned. And now I'm like, that's a $39 half off sale price thing, because I'm not buying no $7,000 painting. It's just like,
I love it. Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. No matter how expensive it is, it's beautiful. All right, so I'm going to read from page 164 of the big book to close us out here. It says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Tony M., as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Once again, Tony, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, Mr. Tony M. And as usual, folks, we do not want you sharing your toothbrush or other personal items that shall not or should not be shared. But we would love for you to pause your device and share that episode with another friend or family member. It may be just what they need today. Now, on to a little bit more of listener feedback. Duncan writes in, and Duncan says, "Hey, John, this is Duncan L. I had my mother forward a letter to you while I was incarcerated. I just wanted to say thank you so much for what you do, and you have no idea how much the pod got me through the first couple of years of a dark time. The podcast was the inspiration I needed to help me get through prison, through the prison experience, and to help it pocket our pride. The meeting that we started on the yard, it never felt stagnant. I knew I could always pop on a podcast and get some solution there. I've been out for less than a week last Tuesday, and the community is taking me back with open arms." So cool, Duncan. So cool. He says, "I speak at the Western Club on Tuesday night. On step 2, chairing a meeting at the round table 5:30s on Thursday, and I will start back to work this morning. What you are doing matters, and we appreciate it. I look forward to listening more. Your friend in recovery, Duncan L." Well, that's so cool, Duncan. Gosh, I love getting these letters or emails, whatever, but communication. Duncan, that is so cool. I'm glad that you're on the right track. I'm glad that my silly little podcast that I got going here was able to provide some sort of respite from the day-to-day and while you were incarcerated. And I'm glad it's able to provide a meeting between meetings when you got out. And anyway, that is just so, so cool, Duncan. And I do remember your mother. And, I want to say something here. I saw this letter, and then I saw like some other notice that I got from another incarcerated individual that had just got out. Now, I know I read one on the beginning of this here episode, but I thought it was somebody else up in Oklahoma, actually. And then I never could find it. And I don't know if I deleted it actually accidentally or something, but if it's been over a month and you wrote me and you're listening and you're thinking, I wonder why I didn't read mine, just re-forward it to me or something. I don't know where that communication was, but I could never find it. But I just wanted to make sure that doesn't slip through the cracks if you're out there and you're listening. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it was somebody in Oklahoma. But anyway, Duncan, thank you, my friend, for writing in. Jera, well, okay, so it's a lady, and I could tell from the picture. I think it's a lady. Anyway, Jeremiah NM post on the Podbean app. She or he, I don't know, they said, This comes under the category of John stinks. Okay, John M stinks. And I read these things when I get them in. And it says, "Get on with it, bro. Shh, John, like be quiet, like shh." And she says, "We're not slow, crikey." So I'm not exactly sure. I know it was on a comment on one of Tracy J's episodes, and so I probably talked extensively maybe on one of them, on either the front end or the back end. Anyway, that did not set well with them. And, I get these every once in a while, and I just like to read them. They're out there. Everyone's got an opinion, and I am more than fine with that opinion. Evie writes in. E-E-E-V-E-E. I love this name. Evie says, "Hi, John. Thank you for accepting me into the Facebook group." Well, Evie, the the pleasure is all mine. She says, I live in England, but I'm French. Have you ever met the Coneheads? French and Conehead. It's an old Saturday Night Live skit. I doubt you have any idea what I'm talking to. But when people would ask them where they're from, they'd say, where are you from? And they would always go, France. and so I don't know why I think of that when I think of the word French. But anyway, she says, I live in England and I'm French. I'm new in my recovery. My sobriety date is the 29th of April, 24. But I've been in and out of AA since October 23rd. But on the 29th of April, my heart and my mind fully open to receive my higher power. Since that day, I wake up every day thanking my higher power for the strength he gives me, and I do say the serenity prayer multiple times a day. I discovered your podcast on YouTube, and I now listen on Amazon Music. I'm still on early episodes, but Jenny L. and Tim S. really touch me. As you say, the podcasts are my meeting between meetings in service and gratitude. EVC. There is, okay, so let me spell this again. So here's where my mind goes. First of all, thank you so much, Evie. I'm so sorry to do this. See, I've got such a plain name, and it's hard to do anything. Well, I there's like the John, the porta potty things and all that sort of stuff. And anyway, but so there are things you could do with my name, but I find other names much more interesting, like Evie. It says EEVEE. So there's 4 of the 5 letters in her name are E. So Evie, you probably don't know this, but I'm just thinking of this. There is a what do you call it? A game show that has been on the air here in the United States. What's it called? Oh, Wheel of Fortune. And Wheel of Fortune, if you can't guess what the word is or something like that, you can do what they call buy a vowel. And so if you bought a vowel and that vowel was E with your name, I mean, it would pretty much be the entire word, which I think is very cool. So anyway, Evie, thank you for writing in. I do appreciate it. God bless you. I'm sorry I don't mean that to be offensive. I'm just kind of telling you where my mind goes. God bless you. Thank you very much. All right. Shannon writes in, and Shannon says, hi, John. My name is Shannon O. And I was introduced to your podcast a couple of months ago. I really just started listening recently, and I now listen to it quite often. I am 59 years old, and I have once again found my way to the halls of AA. Today, I have 170 days. The first time was back in 1982, and I was 15. My mother was trying to find ways to help me, I suppose, tough love, therapy, and she found AA. Unfortunately, I was nowhere ready to admit that I was an alcoholic, but I knew it in my bones. Since the first time I can remember, drinking something magical happened to me. It was, however, a great experience, and I often think of those old timers and the messages they shared. Fast forward to 2024, and my mom has been gone for years, and she was right about all those years ago. I'm happy to say I've made it back in through the doors of AA and to my people. We're glad too, Shannon. She says, I'm so grateful to my mother who never gave up on me and actually found the answers that I'd been looking for my whole life. For all the many old timers who shared their experience, strength, and hope, that one day I could share my story in hopes that that it would help someone like me. I've had really good sobriety, and I've lost it only because I walked away. I've had nudges from the judges and tickets galore. However, in the past 2 years of my life, I've hit a bottom that only a true alcoholic can find. No way out except for a power greater than themselves. I have no idea where I'm heading. I have a sponsor and I'm working the steps. All I can say is something is happening inside of me that hasn't happened before. I'm so grateful for listening to your podcast and the people that share so openly. I'm so thankful for the gal who introduced your podcast to me, and it truly has been an asset in my newfound sobriety. I've told people about you and your podcast, and I hope it helps as it helps others as it's helping me. Thanks for listening, and keep on keeping on. Shannon O. March 2nd of 2024. God bless you, Shannon. Thank you for writing in. And I'm so glad that you have found your way and you found the way back into the rooms again. Very cool. Last but not least, Ashley writes in. And she says, good evening. There's a reason I'm reading this. I guess there's a reason I read all of them, but nonetheless, she says, good evening. My home group is looking for a speaker at our next event. We hold a potluck, all type of thing midwinter. Could you pass on Jennifer HK's contact info? I love her episodes and pass God's puppy one on to my sponsees. Do you have any other recommendations? Anyone else that may have availability in February? Thank you, Ashley H. at the Primary Purpose Group in Bozeman, Montana. So the reason I read that one, first of all, thanks for Ashley for reaching out. And as you know, I passed you on to Jennifer HK. Reason I reach out is because, when I first started this and when I went into the pandemic, everyone was asking me for virtual speakers, right? Who can come to our virtual meeting? Now we're out of the pandemic, whatever we are, but it's not like it was, right? And people are asking me on a consistent basis if I have recommendations for speakers. So if you want me to get you, if you're out there and you're a speaker chair person who's supposed to do all this, reach out to me. I'm at John, JOHN, at soberspeak.com. And in fact, you could reach out to me anyway. You don't have to reach out to me because you want a speaker, just to reach out, just to say hello. But if you need a speaker and you want me to get you in contact with somebody that's been on the podcast in the past, I'm more than happy to do that. And yes, I do have recommendations, and it kind of depends on what you're looking for and all that kind of good stuff, right? So anywho, that does it. We have another one in the books. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. May God bless you and keep you until then. I take this 1 week at a time. I hope to be back next week. We shall see. You never know where life may take us, but that is... Oh, I don't know if they can hear that. Can you hear that? Bark again, mate. Bark again, Maisie. We have a dog here. She's barking. She sees somebody walking down the street. She's about 10 pounds. She couldn't do anything. By the way, when we got this dog, I thought to myself, this is what they mean by bark is worse than their bite. Because all she would do is lick you to death. But nonetheless, that is it. Hope to see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in one more time. Love you guys. Bye-bye.